Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special meeting of the Paso Robles City Council. Mayor Steve Martin speaking. I'd like to read this before we get started. City has returned to hybrid public meetings pursuant to AB 361, which allows for a deviation from the teleconference rules required by the Ralph M. Brown Act. For this portion of our meeting, which is a budget workshop, the meeting will be live streamed and also available to play later on YouTube by accessing the following link, www.prcity.com/YouTube. In addition, residents can listen to the budget workshop portion of the meeting live on the radio at 12:30 a.m. or live stream the meeting at www.prcity.com/YouTube. Please call 805-865-7276 to provide public comment via telephone. Phone line will open just prior to the meeting and remain open throughout the meeting. Written public comments can be submitted via email to cityclerk@prcity.com prior to 12 noon on the day of the meeting to be posted as an addendum to the agenda. If submitting written comments in advance of the meeting, please note the agenda item by number and name. At this time, I'll reconvene the Paso Robles City Council and invite everyone present, as they are able, to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Councilman Hammond, please.
Please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Garcia.
Here.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Hammond.
Here.
Councilmember Strong.
Here.
Mayor Martin.
Here. All members are present. This is a special City Council meeting. Only one item on the agenda tonight, and that is our budget workshop. And at a special meeting, public comment is reserved only for items on the agenda. So the way we're going to do this is we'll go ahead and have our staff presentation, our usual way we review these items, and incorporate public comment as part of that process, as we always do. So under our agenda this evening, we have fiscal years 2022 through 2023 and 2023 through 2024 preliminary budget workshop. And we are ready for the staff presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight, as you astutely pointed out, we're going to be discussing our preliminary workshop, our preliminary budget for the upcoming two-year cycle. I really want to thank two people in particular for preparation of what you're about to see tonight. Mr. Chris Uhot, who is our Assistant City Manager, and then Ryan Cornell, who is our Admin Services Director, spent countless hours, including I saw emails being traded over the weekend on the holiday to get this prepared for everybody tonight. There's a lot of hard work, a lot of thought based upon input from the council and the community on the topics you're going to see tonight, which should give you a general overall view of the budget, its condition, and some of the areas that we're recommending that council look at to have one-time expenditures, expansion of the city team to be able to accomplish a little bit more work, and other areas. So with that, I'd like to have Mr. Cornell step up and carry this out from here.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lewis. City Council, Ryan Cornell, Administrative Services Director. Tonight we have the opportunity to kind of see the big picture of what the budget looks like for the next 2 years for fiscal years 22, starting on July 1st, 2022, and then really ending on June 30th, 2024, so 2 years, the 2-year cycle. Here's the kind of the agenda for tonight. There is a lot. I have 57 slides to kind of go through. Not all of them are actual context, but just want to kind of give a kind of an idea of the context or the amount of context we're going to be presenting tonight. We're going to kind of start with some of the background, kind of where we are or where we came from, where we are now. And then we're going to dive right on into kind of in department overviews. We're going to go one by one. I start with public safety, kind of get into some of the community development administrations, and then really kind of talk about the reorg and kind of what that kind of looks like for public works and community services, the new utilities department. And then we'll kind of answer that question, how do we pay for it all? So we'll kind of look at that fund overviews. We'll look at ongoing revenues, kind of compare that to ongoing expenses, and then kind of look at our reserves. You know, the general fund has very solid and healthy reserves, and so there's proposals to use some one-time use of reserves. We'll kind of go into detail of what that actually looks like, and then we'll kind of wrap up the discussion with capital projects. I don't know if you had a chance to read the staff reports. One thing that's missing out of the staff report is how do we fund all those capital projects? Not all of it is general funded. So we'll go into a little bit more detail on how we're planning on funding some of these major capital projects. But for the most part on the department overviews, we're going to kind of talk about each department, kind of see what they are financially, what their staffing plan is for the next couple of years, and then kind of see what their supplemental requests are. With that being said, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Chris Hewitt to kind of give the budget background and kind of where we were and where we're going.
Chris, is your mic on?
Better? There we go. All right. Good evening once again. We wanted to kick it off again with some budget overviews and themes. These are some of those items, topics, kind of themes for the budget that we've talked a little bit about in the past. What I want to reiterate off the top is that everything you're going to see tonight is strategically aligned with those goals that the council adopted at your last meeting. It's reflective of the fiscal environment and the needs of the community. And when I say reflective of the fiscal environment, we understand the dynamics that are taking place locally, but also some of those trends that we're seeing nationally in terms of some of those economic headwinds. And so we try to balance those two factors out in the bigger picture here. So while, again, we're still projecting revenue growth and key revenue sources and are going to be able to accomplish a lot with this budget, we're also cognizant and aware that the economy is probably not as robust or will not be as robust over this next 2-year budget cycle as we've experienced in the last 12 to 18 months. Of course, we're living within our means. You'll see that in just a moment as Mr. Cornell walks you through the budget. Targeted investments to build capacity, again, looking strategically throughout the organization. There is a need across the organization to build out some of those departments to better align with the service level expectations and the capacity and demands that are being placed on the departments. Of course, want to make sure we're using one-time funds for one-time projects. So Mr. Cornell will talk a little bit more about that. Prioritizing all those key areas that the council has prioritized and the goals and that the community has prioritized in the feedback that we've received. And then we'll get sick of hearing the term, but it's important, shovel ready. And that's important on many different levels, but we're going to be moving a lot of projects to shovel ready status with this budget, which is exciting. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Cornell, and I will see you in just a few minutes.
All right, we're going to dive right into it. So the first one we're going to do is the police department. So the police department is the largest department within the city. It has proposed appropriations for fiscal year 22-23 at $15.6 million and $17 million for the second year. 1 in every 3 people that the city hires works under the direction or supervision of the police chief. So it is by far the largest, not only in fiscal dollar sense, but also by bodies. The department is funded. There's kind of 4 different funding sources for the police department. The first one is the general fund. The next one is the downtown parking fund. They also have a state supplemental kind of grant fund too that's going to be used for capital projects. And then more recently, the Measure J20 supplemental sales tax that was approved by voters in 2020. The proposed appropriations out of Measure J20 for police department is about just $4 million. So just kind of by means of that graph, you kind of see that the general funded department budget was a little more $10 million a year. And then just with just Measure J20, we were kind of able to add 40% capacity to the department because of that sales tax measure. And that's kind of what the purpose of Measure J20 was, right? To kind of enhance police operations, to improve response times and the like. And so the graph on the left here kind of shows that each individual position that the police department houses and the number of positions, or the quantity of those positions. So just off the top, this police officers, dispatchers, and sergeants are the highest, or the most people that we employ out of the police department. And those other little grinds, so the lighter green is the current status, and the kind of the add-ons are the proposed staffing augmentations for the next 2 years. And so you can see that the investments are going to boots on the ground. They're going to police officers, they're going to go to dispatchers, and they're going to sergeants for the most part. Now, there are additional proposed positions being added. For fiscal year 22-23, it's an additional commander, it's an additional sergeant, 7 officers. It is converting 2 part-time parking enforcement officers and making it to 1 full-time position. Like I said, the additional 2 dispatchers And then it's reclassing another training coordinator, currently part-time, to a full-time status there. And then in the second year, fiscal year 23-24, it's proposed that we add on a deputy chief, again, because we're getting more police officers, more boots on the ground. We'll kind of need different leadership roles. That kind of goes along with the same lines with the sergeant and the 7 additional police officers in the second year. So as a department as a whole, when it's fully implemented, the department is currently at 67.82 full-time equivalents. That's going to increase to 79.41. That's 11.5 FTE increase from one year to the next. And then to 88.41 in the second year, that's an additional 9 employees. So essentially 20 employees kind of about from where we're at today until it's kind of fully implemented in 2 years.
Yes.
Yeah, so I should have said, I did build in some natural breaks and some questions in. So on the department overviews, I have police and fire kind of going first, and then we'll have community development and the kind of the administrative offices second, and then we'll break for questions there. And then the third one is going to be with public works and community services and the reorg.
Also, listen, everybody get that off. It's not up there.
Let me see.
It blocks out a lot of
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when Measure J, when the staffing plan for Measure J20 is fully implemented, when it's said and done, the measure would add 29 additional positions to the police department. And the kind of the big question that I'm hearing a lot though too is, we approved 7 additional positions in this fiscal year and we have yet to fill one of them. Why are we adding all these police officers if we can't recruit the first 7? And then to answer that question, we are proposing a police officer lateral recruitment program. It'll be kind of a one-time hiring incentive bonus as well as a housing loan assistance. That's going to go to City Council for consideration and approval at the next meeting on June 7th. In addition to the 29 positions that are proposed over the next 2 years, you will need kind of a home for those new officers. So a police substation and an expansion of the evidence room is also on being proposed in the next 2 years. It's currently under design. We're looking at the facilities at Second Wind Way. The estimated construction cost is about $2.3 million. And then when it's, and then lastly too, on the proposal for Measure J20, we're looking at about, using almost about half of what funds are available out of that towards the police department functions. Moving on to fire and emergency services, this is the second largest department within the city with total appropriations of about $9.6 million in both fiscal years 22, 23, and 23, 24. The vast majority of the expenditures goes towards personnel, right? It's the people that respond to those calls for services. And we have about 1 in every 5 employees that are employed with the city that's under direct supervision of the fire chief. Similar to Measure J20, the focal point of the measure was to enhance fire emergency services operations. So to date, the City Council has committed almost $7 million to Fire Station number 3 for the construction of that facility. Work is currently underway, and we're expecting the construction to be finished in about a year. As soon as the construction is complete with Fire Station number 3, we're going to move on to this kind of the second phase of the overall envisioning of the site, and that's the design of the training tower and facility. So it's about $1 million for design and construction in year 3, which is kind of outside the 2-year budget cycle. It's slated at about $2.5 million. Outside of those 2 requests, the additional supplemental requests from the department include a fire hose replacement. And then some fire engine replacements in the second year. The reason why it's in the second year is because there's such a 18 to 24 month lead time in order to get those engines ordered in the house. And so those are the kind of the estimated costs of those 3 pieces of equipment. There is a funding shortfall. Let me take a step backwards. Right, the city has a past practice of setting aside money each year for replacement of the vehicle. Costs for fire engines have gone up so dramatically over the last couple of years that our money that we set aside for the eventual replacement isn't enough. And so we have the strategy of using those funds that we do have set aside plus Measure J20 in order to replace these 3 vehicles. And then as far as personnel goes, the department is proposing 2 additional positions. One is a deputy fire chief, and the second position is a fire prevention specialist. The deputy fire chief is kind of a byproduct of adding additional firefighters. We're going to have a 3rd station on board. So we'll be planning for succession planning and span of control. The deputy chief position is being proposed there. And then when we get into community development a little bit more and showing kind of residential permits and that like activity, we'll show you that the reason why the fire prevention specialist is being recommended the 2nd year. So for Measure J20, right, for when it's all said and done, when it's fully implemented, that would be hiring 15 employees to the fire department, 12 firefighters, the administrative captain have both been approved, and these 2 additional positions are. So that's my first pause for questions.
Thank you. Council questions, I think Mr. Hammond was first.
Okay. Ryan, on the back at the parking, we have 2 part-time. Well, we have 1 full-time, I believe, and then 2 part-time parking staff. And you're going to convert, I think, to just 1.
We currently have 1 parking ambassador, like supervisor, that's Donna, and then we have 3 part-time.
3.
CSO, so community services officers for enforcement. So the proposal is taking 2 out of those 3 part-timers and converted to 1 full-timer. So you'd have a Donna, you'd have a full-time community service officer and a part-time community service officer.
Well, that'll cover our time that we have to basically police the area, or we're going to have some holes in there. David, yeah. I just, because with what we're doing here with all the parking 7 days a week now, and I'm just curious, how much staff we're going to really need to cover it properly.
Mr. Mayor, Council, even if we just had the 3 part-timers, it wouldn't cover all of the time. This will dramatically increase the number of hours that we can put towards not only keeping track of the cars, the parking, the stats, but also, giving the tickets, enforcement, and corrective action towards people. So this is a huge step forward for us to actually do what we need to do to get this program going in the right direction.
Okay, very well. And then the other thing too, real quick, Damien, there was 29 officers that are going to be hired. Is that all in the first year, or at least we're going to float all those in the first year, or is it just over the 2 years?
It's over 2 years.
Okay, that was my other question.
Okay,
great. Thank you.
Councilman Strong, then Councilman Gregory.
Yes, questions first, police department. First of all, we don't want a school shooting in Paso Robles. So every document and every decision we make should be a living decision that's cognizant of changing factors. And we weren't really, this wasn't high on the radar up until just recently, although it should have been, but it wasn't. So in doing some research, I find that there is a national organization that trains people specifically as school safety officers, not as sworn police officers, but school safety, so that you could do it with 2 part-time people a day at a school to keep the costs low. They don't have to get the same kind of pay as an officer. But I'm hoping that we can find some place in here to look into doing that for our school system, or working with our school board to provide safety for our children. Any thoughts?
I'm not familiar with the positions you're speaking of. Obviously, we have 2 SROs. We're, as we get staffing, where there's a plan for at a minimum a 3rd SRO. We already had, prior to the incidents of last week, we'd already had planned active shooter training. We invited the school districts, we invited fire. That is something that we do try to do on a yearly basis. COVID kind of took us off that track. So there is a lot of stuff that we are doing, that we are proactively doing. And we obviously do have a lot of communication with the local school boards. I'm not aware of.
And is that built into our budget?
Yes, sir.
Into your budget? Okay. Just so that we, are proactive in getting this done. I want to see us be on the cutting edge, not on the tail end.
I'm in full agreement with you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Council questions, Mr.
But
Gregory?
wait, I still had one more.
I'm sorry. You said
Fire department. The aerial ladder truck that we're planning to get. How many stories reach will that have? Are we planning for higher structures here in the city with public safety?
So the max that aerial ladder truck can reach is about 4 stories. We have buildings taller than that we have approved for construction or have already been constructed.
Is there any way that this can be upgraded to something that can fully service the existing buildings at those heights?
So when you start going anything above 5 stories, really the reach is about 100 feet as tall as you want to go. So really it's just additional training and additional tools and equipment for the firefighters actually go inside and go to the stories that are at the top.
Okay, and is that now built into our budget then so that we can handle these structures that we're now approving and
Yes, sir.
building? Okay, very good. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask one question of Jonathan, since he's there, real quick? On that truck, 2.2 million is a lot of dollars. Is there any way that we can refurbish our piece of equipment that we own?
So we sold our last fire engine to Templeton Fire Department, and they refurbed theirs. They spent about $300,000 on it, and they've had nothing but problems since they refurbed it. The problem is there's a lot of safety features that don't get updated in a refurb because those come out with the new equipment. Additionally, if you want to overhaul the engines, things like that. So our engines that we just bought are about $800,000, somewhere in there. You're probably looking at $500,000 to $600,000 in refurb, but it's still not a new build.
Well, I'm thinking specifically about the truck.
Yeah, so I would think you're looking at 50% of the cost at least, and you're still not guaranteed that it's going to have all the updated safety equipment.
How much do you think we'll be able to make from, obviously you would sell the piece of equipment. I mean, what's it worth on something like that?
Realistically, 30, 40,000.
Really?
That's
all.
it. That's all those are worth. So really, do you want to refurb something like that has such little value?
All right, thank you, John.
Councilman
It's 20-year stuff like, right?
What's that?
And I do believe they have a 20-year useful life too.
Yeah, I know. It's
And so we
2000.
extended it 5, so
It's
it's
2 years
25
over.
years.
I know.
It's a 2,000. So we've extended it 5 additional years.
So we'll have Jonathan standing up there. So we have a fund for the replacement of the fire engines,
Yes, we do.
including the ladder truck?
Yes, we do. There was just a shortfall with the estimated cost of the replacement versus the actual updated cost.
Okay. All right. And then I have a question for Chief Damien here. So just for the record, we have 2 full-time resource officers with the school district already that we're sharing the bill on, right?
Yes, sir.
So we already have 2 in place, Fred. And then we in the budget, you're adding a 3rd, right?
Yes.
Good.
And do they cover just the high school or other campuses?
They cover other campuses also.
That's what I thought.
And then on the substation, the budget on the substation for the police department, that covers the complete remodel of it for the police department's needs, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. And then on the J20 funds, and this is probably a better question for Ryan to answer, the J20 funds were going to be used for a lot of one-time costs like the substation. So we're going to be hiring 29 officers over the next 2 years, which I'm fully in favor of doing. How do we reconcile that in 12 years if J20 goes away?
I don't have an answer for you, honestly,
Okay.
if that were to happen.
Yeah.
It is an ongoing expenditure stream whenever we bring on personnel. So that is, yes, that is a risk we know that's going on the horizon. Very similar to E12 in 2 years is going to expire in 2 years as well. So we definitely need to start strategizing and figuring out a way to continue to maintain our roads at what they're currently at.
All right. And we can depend on some of the funding from the CFDs, right?
That is correct. When we kind of dive into community development a little bit, each one of those specific plans has an additional tax layer. It's called a community facilities district tax that for services, police, fire, road maintenance, kind of the like too, are going to be picked up with that additional add-on tax to those residences only.
And we haven't figured those into our calculations because they're not here yet, correct?
Correct.
Right.
So I think that answers all my questions. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Any other questions on this section of the presentation? Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Okay, moving on to community development. So that's going to be a little tricky. So this graph right here, it just shows kind of a history of building permits within our city back from 1990. So a nice 30-year history, and then kind of what we're forecasting over the next 3 to 4 years. And as you can see, so the color of the lines are different permit types, but if you kind of focus in on that kind of that dash line, that's kind of a weighted average marker. But as you can see, kind of when we get out to the 23, 24 years, we're going to see permit activity kind of pretty much break 30-year history or records, honestly. I mean, those are all for the developments that are already kind of in the queue, and we know they're going to be construction. That includes the River Oaks 2 residential development. It includes the 1,293 in Olson South Chandler. It includes the 200 units of the Red Tail apartments and the 80-unit Riverwalk apartments as well. And that doesn't even include the potential for the landing warehouse and all the other industrial warehouses of kind of West Area and Tractors Lane and the like. And the hotels, right? And the hotel development, right? So these are kind of all kind of coming in the horizon, and we know it's coming. So a lot of investment in community development, staffing, and the kind of the needs of that department is going to be a focal point in this 2-year cycle. So when it's all said and done, this is the proposal for community development. Over the last couple of years, they've been hovering right around $3.5 million in annual appropriations, and kind of right around 7% of the overall general fund activity. But as you can see, in the next couple of years, there is some investment in community development. $4.5 million of appropriations in the first year, and just over $4.5 million in the second year. Again, a majority of those increases are coming from bodies, and so let's kind of talk about the bodies that are being proposed out of the community development department. So starting with the building operations for fiscal year 22-23, there's 2 positions that are being recommended. It's a deputy building official and a development services manager, and in the second year, it's an additional building inspector. Again, this is going to be kind of development driven and kind of what the needs are today. And so on the development services side of it, we only have 1 permit technician today, and the workload is already kind of getting too much for this 1 person. So we're going to add on a development services manager, still maintain the existing position, but the 2 of them are essentially going to maintain all of the additional permit activity moving forward. And then the second proposal is the additional deputy building official too. Back early before the Great Recession, we actually had 2 deputy during that time. So we're bringing that position back. And then again, as development occurs, the second or the third building inspector would be needed. On the engineering side, there's only 2 positions that are being proposed. In the first year, it's a part-time kind of internship. This position is going to be kind of more geared towards doing traffic counts, traffic surveys, and kind of some very minor engineering work. And then in the second year, again, due to growth, having another second engineering inspector as well out on the field. And then last thing in the planning division side of the department, 2 additional positions, 1 an associate planner that'll be able to help get some more technical plans through in the process, and in the second year, a planning technician to kind of help that customer service experience in the community development department. And then as far as the rest of the department goes, there's 3 proposed supplemental requests. They're kind of listed here. The first one's the Mill Road annexation entitlement process. This includes annexing some of the properties over by Barney Sports Park and the athletic club and tennis club, and kind of that area, and get a parallel route to Mill Road. The second one is some signal safety enhancements. There are 2 intersections, one at 6th and Spring and Golden Hill and Creston, that we know are trouble and have a higher tendency for accidents. And so there's a proposal to get some more striping, some more signage, some more better lighting in those intersection areas. And then lastly, the River Road Trail Connector. This is the bike and ped master plan, the big plan to develop a overarching ring around the city for a trail. This project that's being recommended is just the North River Road a part of that overall project. And then lastly, supplementals that aren't necessarily included in the budget documents today. It's kind of dependent on if the TOT tax measure that's up for council's consideration gets passed. Those are kind of the downtown area projects, Norma's Alley design and pedestrian improvements, a railroad district streetscape project, and some lighting. I do want to make a note too, we are kind of still trying to figure out, the lighting is an important project, it's a higher priority project, and so we're trying to, even if the TOT measure doesn't move forward, we still want to fund that project somehow, some way. So we're still kind of tinkering with the numbers a little bit to figure out how we get that project move forward, regardless of the TOT act. Okay, let's see if I missed anything. All right.
Good time for questions.
Yeah.
You want to?
Time to talk? Councilman Strong?
Low-income housing. And I'm wondering, we only have one real mobile home park in this city. And some of those, one of those in that mobile home park sold for $450,000 just this last month. So they're not really low income. And yet I can remember a time when I know that the state controls some of that. Just because the state has some control in it, it's not totally local control. I'm hoping that we can take a look at making that type of zoning available in some of our areas. Is that a possibility and included in anywhere in here in order to address our low and moderate income area?
Yeah, I think everything's on the table in terms of addressing housing needs. Obviously, mobile home parks were a solution across the country in the 60s. We kind of fell out of favor. Right now, most of the kind of mobile home kind of permittings for these temporary RV parks for transient lodging. But I do think there's an opportunity to revisit that. I know there's a lot of discussion about kind of tiny homes and different kinds of RV for permanent housing. And I think that's a good thing for your Housing Constraints and Opportunities Committee to be tasked with. That's really what they're here, is to explore, what the policy options are with different types of housing. And I do think mobile home parks is one of those things we need to revisit soon.
Well, the interesting thing is we still call them mobile home parks, but now it's mostly manufactured housing.
MUs.
They're really not mobile at all, but they are manufactured, and actually they're very efficient and they hold up for decades. So I think they've gotten a bum rap. Maybe I'm a little bit prejudiced because I helped build thousands of them during the late 60s and 70s across the whole country, and very successfully. And some of them more expensive than some of the best homes in our area. So, yeah, let's not neglect that area, I hope. Okay? Thank you.
Councilwoman Garcia?
Just on that same note, Warren, I just had a question. Do we have a limit on ADUs for our city?
No, there's no limit on ADUs. We've put some projections in the housing element of how many we think we're going to produce, because the state, was going to give us basically RENA credit for those. But that's really a ceiling, or not a ceiling, it's a floor rather than a ceiling. There is no limit on the number of ADUs we can permit. And right now we're trying to encourage as many as possible.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's all I have, sir.
Councilman Hammond?
Okay, maybe for a question on the funding for community development. Everything's paid. In other words, we charge all the development full cost of recovery, isn't it, pretty much? Or is there a certain percentage that comes out of general fund for your department?
So I think the majority of it is covered under the cost recovery permits. There's certain administrative functions that aren't. But yeah, based on our fee studies that we've done, we're supposed to be capturing the vast majority of that with permits. We know, and we're suggesting when we update the fees, that we have a new fee just for these tract single-family houses. And based on that fee, we've calculated that we could probably cover all the new staffing just with that one fee alone.
That's what I was thinking, because we're adding 2 to 3 people here in the next couple of years, and that's what I was wondering. Sure. The other thing I had was, I just missed it, lost my mind on that one. Well, I'll bring this up right now too. The council, we talked about the possibility of a parking structure, and it didn't make the list as far as our goal, right? And I'm just curious, maybe from staff, if we did want to do something like that, that would pretty much be a capital improvement on its own, wouldn't it be? That we'd have it'd be separate and distinct from this goal setting that we're talking about?
Yes, Mr. Hammond, if you wanted to move forward, if the council collectively felt that parking structure was in the best interest of the community, of course, we'd have to figure out how to pay for it. Currently, Estimates are anywhere from $25 million and up for a structure of that size. We haven't got to it yet, but there's a number of capital improvement projects that we're going to be planning for when we talk about shovel ready, including 3 bridges that have to be built and others. So finding a funding stream when we talk about the future of our community, whether it's the road tax that's ready to expire, and our J20 money as well has a sunset clause on it also. So planning for the future, that's going to be the theme that you're going to hear throughout this budget report, is being shovel ready. The parking structure is something that I think that council has batted around and talked about for at various points. But if that's a priority for council during this 2-year budget cycle, then we can certainly, bring that back as a discussion item for addition with some options on how we could potentially pay for that.
Exactly. Yeah. If we find a funding source basically with a downtown improvement district and all kinds of ways, parking also, and maybe private enterprise get in there. If we could turn the numbers without impacting anything else, I don't see a problem moving forward on a project like that. But I'm just curious. I didn't really make the list, and it's something that we have talked a lot about. So I'll maybe find the next question for later. So, I'm sorry.
Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, Warren, these are just informational questions. Development Services Manager. What is that person and what do they do?
So basically, we have a permit coordinator right now. Basically, it's a more extensive version of that person or that position. They'll be basically in charge of coordinating the whole permitting process between all the divisions, which would be the building division, planning, engineering, fire, and public works, make sure all the permits go through, collection, calculation of all the fees, and then maintenance of the Excella permit issuance system. So all of that, as well as all the basically admin staff and permitting staff would be under that position.
Sounds like something we need.
Yes.
Other question for you on the River Road Trail Connector. Is that from Creston to the 46th Bridge?
Yeah, Creston Road, basically Union Road, along the river frontage, all the way up to under the 46th Bridge and up to River Oaks Drive. That's the connection we're looking at.
And then on your plan, it looked pretty good. You have 2 associate planners and 2 assistant planners, or is there 3 associate planners?
2 of each.
2 of each, okay. And we have 2 now, right?
We have 1 associate and 2 assistants currently.
Okay. So we don't count Darren as 2?
He's a city planner. Yeah.
He's worth 2, though. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have another question for you, Warren, or maybe Ryan too. I'm not sure. There was no commercial projections on the screen. It was all residential pretty much. Are we taking into account commercial development?
Yeah, we've got multiple versions of that chart. That chart just focuses on residential production, which is where we're going to see the most growth. But we have, like Brian said, we have projections for commercial and hotel growth as well.
Okay. All right.
We have charts for every occasion.
Yeah, I figured, but I just didn't see it up here. So
any other questions? Councilwoman Garcia.
Yes, Warren, I have a question. On the new positions, are those in-house people moving up?
I believe probably about half of those would just be people moving up, and then half of them are probably new hires.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council questions in this section? Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Warren. Okay, we get to move on to the best department in the city.
Okay.
I wrote that joke down too. That's how bad that was. Okay. Next up is administrative services. I joke, I kid, but anyways, so here's the actual expenditures out of the department for the last 3 years and proposed expenditures moving forward. As you can see, in fiscal year 21-22, the department expenditures are projected to be about $5.5 million, and then increasing to 6.2 in the first year and 6.6 million in the second year. One thing I did want to note out with this graph too, there's a little line bar piece of it that's kind of scrolling across there, and what that is the percentage of general fund expenditures the department incurs. And so somehow in 1920 and 2021, the department was about 12% of the overall general fund expenditures, and then all of a sudden it dropped off to 4 or 5%. The reason is because we did an accounting change. We moved if you recall, the information technology replacement fund got retitled to a central service fund. The risk management fund, which was a lot of the premiums for the general liability, got retitled to a risk management central service fund. And so not only is the general fund funding those activities, so is the water, so is the wastewater fund. So if you want to see those specific expenditures, you have to kind of go to those funds specifically, just by product. So that's what I look at that blue bar graph is actually more of a realistic picture of what the department's overall general fund obligations are. But like I said, there was a slight reorganizational change in admin services. That is moving the information technology division. Oh, you know what? Let me take a step backwards, because I'm going to talk about reorg here in a second. But one of the items is moving the IT division over to admin services. And so all of the prior year numbers, and even moving forward, when I really dive into the reorg, all of the prior numbers I've readjusted so that the reorg happened 5 years ago, so that when you look year to year, it's more apples to apples comparison. Okay, so for admin services, the IT division is leaving the city manager's office and going over to admin services. There's no magic or science behind it. Kind of the common theme is central services, right? Finance has a central service through every department. Human resources has a common theme through every department, and so does IT. So we're kind of centralizing all of those kind of services under one umbrella. It also helps too that IT just happens to be in the back of the office building that we're part of, and so it's a little bit easier for Dave to get the department head contact with me being in the same building there. But the supplemental request, and then the second piece of the reorg is the utility billing division function moving over to the newly created utilities department. Supplemental requests is one new human resources specialist. With all the positions we're proposing adding in the next 2 years, we're going to need to move more quickly on our recruitment, and so needing an additional body to help that will be able to get some of those recruitments launched and on board. In addition to that too, once we get more people on, that means there's more leaves criteria, Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA. There's a lot of more legalese and monitoring of employees, evaluations, and making sure that the proper step increases are happening. And so as we build staff, we'll just need more HR folks and personnel in general. Kind of along those same lines too, right, with technology, as we get more people on, we're getting more police officers on, have more vehicles and have more computers in the vehicles. That's kind of where the additional information technology technician staff comes into play. And so we're kind of waiting off, not going to do that one initially out of the gate in year one, but once we get people on board, we'll get an additional, a third IT technician position. I'm sorry, a fourth one on board. And then lastly, the last proposed personnel change out of the department is reclassing a payroll specialist. Right now we have one staff that's kind of dedicated to doing payroll for that entire city. But in addition to doing payroll, we want to put some more risk management components on that desk, kind of alleviate some of the work pressures from the human resources manager that really can go down to a lower level staff employee. So that's kind of an additional workload for that desk. And so what that actually will do is that'll put the payroll risk specialist on the same range scale as the human resources specialists. And so then administratively, I could play with them a little bit more interchangeably than I can do now today. Outside of personnel, the additional supplemental request is a class and comp study for $150,000 in each one of the years. Again, this is important to make sure that the city continues to stay competitive in the labor market, and we're recruiting and retaining the best people we possibly can. And in addition to that, just make sure that operationally speaking, we're doing it the most efficient and the most effective way possible. So having a professional company that comes in there that looks at multiple organizations, how they're structured, how they operate, is going to be kind of beneficial and what we're looking for.
Have we used one of those companies before?
I don't believe if we used that company before, it was
I don't think so.
several years ago.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, to my knowledge, since I've been with the city, we haven't done that. The idea behind this is we've used staff internally to do comparison studies where we look at a salary survey for certain classifications to kind of determine where we are in the market, but we've never looked organizationally, top to bottom, to determine if are the way we broadband people or not. I think there's been discussions about management salaries versus boots on the ground salaries, how we compare across the county and other cities that are situationally similar to us. So it was really important for us to have an idea of where we are from a professional firm to make sure that our class and compensation is on target with where we should be with a growing community and organization.
Thank you.
And then the last request, again, this is coming straight from the city council goals and strategic plans of making sure that our finances are open. So there's some transparency software plugged in for the second year of the budget at $30,000. That simply does, we have quarterly financial reports presented to city council. This will give the community the opportunity to see real-time data as we upload it weekly or monthly, however we plan on doing that. Okay. Moving on to the city manager's operations there, and I'm going to turn it over to Chris here in a little bit, but the department has about $2 million of expenditures each year. One thing I kind of noticed off this graph, the fiscal year 21-22 overall expenditures is actually a little bit lower than it should have been. I don't know if you heard this or not, but we didn't have a city manager for the first part of the fiscal year. And we also didn't have an assistant city manager for the first part of the fiscal year too. So there was actually kind of some one-time budget savings in fiscal year 21-22 that.
Why wasn't I in for it?
That you didn't actually see in 2021 and moving forward. So, with that being said, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Chris Hewitt to kind of give his department overview.
I do exist. Good evening once again, Council and Mayor. Wanted to talk just quickly about some major initiatives, maybe a little bit different than some of the other department presentations Ryan was walking you through, but really what I wanted to communicate to you all are some of those main things that our team is spending quite a bit of time on. And so while our supplemental request is, I'll talk about in just a moment, are just a few. We spend quite a bit of time on some very broad items that we're working with all departments on, and these are just some hand-picked items that I wanted to just reinforce with you as well as the public. Of course, I've spent quite a bit of time on the organizational restructure that Ryan will talk about in just a moment. We're really wanting to emphasize in the upcoming budget cycle customer service, professional development, as we just talked about, recruitment, retention. So there's going to be some items that I'll talk about in a moment related to that. Of course, we've been spending quite a bit of time on both the potential for a TOT increase as well as our clerk's office or clerk spending quite a bit of time on making sure we're prepared for the election coming up. Of course, wanting to enhance our public information and communications and our outreach. So working with our civic engagement coordinator to make sure that we've got resources in place to, again, bolster those efforts. Cannabis will be coming back to you probably right after the start of the fiscal year for a discussion. So we're moving that discussion forward. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the development of a legislative platform and a comprehensive grant writing program. And I'll just jump right into that. That's one of our 3 supplemental requests. One of the things that many cities utilize is a legislative platform which outlines the council and the community's priorities and goals that can then be translated to action at the state and federal level. We have a lot of state and federal assets in and around this community. Obviously, there's opportunities to partner with the state and the federal government almost daily on programs, opportunities for funding, especially in the upcoming budget cycle. So what this is really going to do is put some rubber to the road in terms of having a consistent ongoing presence, both in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. Not that we already don't have some of that presence. We obviously have great relationships with our state and federal legislators, and I know we have several staff members and electeds that are active in both of those areas, but this is going to be putting constant communication in place and constant discussion in place with a presence both, again, in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. On the grant writing side, this team behind me puts together quite a few grant applications throughout the year as they become available. Those grant applications, as you're probably aware, are pretty comprehensive. The state and the feds like information. And that, that is one of those capacity kind of limiting things that we have to look at and balance throughout the year when we're diverting time to those grant applications. It's worthy. We need to go after that money. But as we started to look at it, is there a better way to potentially augment staff time with assistance in this area? And we feel the answer is yes. So part of what we'd like to do is match up potentially a legislative advocacy component and a platform with a grant writing team that theoretically potentially could work for one entity. And by doing that, we're going to maximize the time that we have with staff in addressing these grant opportunities. And something else that the grant writing team will do is it's not just writing the application. It would be literally meeting with our team on a monthly or more frequent basis to make us aware of new grants that are coming through, and then moving into that grant writing stage and support stage. They're really in tune with the different programs and agencies at the state and federal level. So they'll really help us fine tune those grant applications. The way this program works is it's kind of like a monthly retainer. So we can have them write as many grants and help us with as many grant applications as we have that capacity for. And that's actually probably more cost effective than doing what we have done in the not too distant past, which is utilizing consultants on a case-by-case basis for grant writing. So there's actually, we believe, a cost savings over time by going this route. And again, we're going to be a little bit more consistent, proactive with our efforts there. On the administrative assistant side, again, as we've reviewed operations, we have quite a bit of work that's going on out in the city manager's office, as you can see by some of those major initiatives. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of phone calls. There's quite a bit of public interaction. And right now, those types of duties are primarily being handled by your city clerk and your civic engagement coordinator. Based upon a review of the operations, we felt it was pretty critical to have an administrative assistant function in the office. That's going to go a long way with handling constituent requests, coordinating efforts on the council's behalf, and coordinating efforts in the city manager's office, and frankly, freeing up capacity of our city clerk and of our city civic engagement coordinator, myself and Ty, to be focused on some of those broader strategic initiatives that this council has set forth. So that's the thought behind that position. And then agenda prep software. Melissa will probably want to spend an hour talking about this, but we won't let her. She can explain to you that prepping an agenda, whether it's a 2-item agenda like tonight or a 25-item agenda, it takes a lot. There's a lot of manual process that goes along behind the scenes to get everything correct from a formatting and preparation standpoint to a publishing standpoint. And there are programs out there that make it streamlined from the time a staff report is entered into the system through the workflow and review process, all the way to publishing that item and publishing that agenda and then actually managing the meeting. And so we think it's a great investment. It's about $90,000 one time, depending on the software you pick. There's some ongoing cost at a much less amount. But what it's going to do is it's going to make the process a lot more efficient for staff and frankly free up a little bit of Melissa's time to focus on 1,000 other things that she has to keep in check for us. So this system, it's something that I've seen work really well, and we'd like to make that investment for the staff and for the council and for the public, because what it does also is it makes the agenda presentation a bit more user-friendly. As we're cataloging video, it can catalog video and audio up with different items, make it real friendly for the public to go back and look at the agenda and look at items after the fact as well. So it felt like a win-win there. Wanted to bring out real quick, I'll be brief here, economic development, because I know we've had some questions on how we're approaching economic development since the city council reinvested and bringing that economic development manager position back on board. So I wanted to let the council know that we are budgeting, let me get my number here, about $750,000 in economic development for next fiscal year, and then about the same amount, more or less, in the following year. And really what that's covering is implementation of the economic development strategic plan, which the update will be underway in the not too distant future, looking at potential data analysis tools to help us do that. Business development and outreach, there were some questions on opportunities to engage potential industries, clusters, businesses, and we'll be doing that through some targeted outreach. And then obviously wanting to make sure that we're involved regionally from a collaboration standpoint. Spaceport is another obvious focus and vision of the economic development team. So we will have that phase 2 contract amendment with the Tartaglia and the WIT group for your consideration on the 7th. As we talked about in the earlier workshop, there's some significant potential investments that are going to be necessary to move phases 3 and 4, which are future phases, forward if the council so chooses. Those are not included in the budget as of now. I just want to be clear with the council. We're going to wait and bring back that discussion on phase 2 before we get further direction on the next phases. Broadband and those community partnerships are also under economic development. So anything that we're doing contractually with Main Street, the Wine Alliance, or the Chamber will fall into this budget in those contributions. So we're going to be meeting with those groups this week and next week, I believe, to have further discussions on what those arrangements would look like. So with that, I believe that concludes my discussion, and we'll pause for questions.
Council questions? Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, Chris, on our Wi-Fi development, there's no number specified on that. Can you go over that with us a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So this council, when the MOU with the city of Atascadero was approved, there was a $100,000 appropriation made at that time. And so really, I think that's going to get us through the next several months in terms of developing the broadband strategy, the regional broadband strategy. So that's going to be the main focus along. I know IT and Paul are also working on moving forward with the EDA grant, which has already been budgeted for. So that kind of encompasses the broadband dollars right now. Again, once that strategy is complete, we're going to probably be back to council for obviously a discussion of follow-up and any additional funds that may be necessary and that are available. We'll likely be making a recommendation at the time. We just didn't want to put the cart before the horse on that one.
And how much was that budget?
For the MOU development,
West, yeah.
It was $100,000, which the council has already.
I mean Digital West.
Oh, sorry, the EDA grant.
Wasn't there a grant?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, different projects, actually installing fiber throughout the city. Yeah, that one is fully funded with both the EDA match of 3 million, 2.8 million, and the local match of about 700,000.
And is there a city contribution in that as
Yeah,
well?
about 700,000, and that's already been appropriated in this current year.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Chris, with the grant, I'm going to ask a question about the grant writer. And, in your proposal, it sounds like you're contracting a lot. Are we actually putting a grant writer onto our staff?
No, that's a great point of clarification. The answer is no, we would not be putting a full-time position on staff. This is a third-party vendor that does this each and every day for a lot of different cities, but it would be on a monthly retainer type of contract.
Yeah, that we talked about. I think that's a great idea. With all the tax money that we hear out there and also the new created money, I think we need to get part of it back here to Paso Robles. So I think whatever we can do to make that happen, that's really, really important. The other question I had was, software tools, anything, not just this department, but any of the other departments that can extend a particular individual's abilities, I guess you might say, is really, I think, something I'd like to look at and make sure that we're taking advantage of, with the new packages and software and everything that McHugh would find out there that we might want to talk about. I think that's something to research and turn over.
Agreed. Yes.
Thank you.
Councilman Strong.
Yeah, and there are a number of areas I'm very concerned about and how we're going to spend that money and exactly how we're going to maneuver it. And one of them, it has to do with the grants, because the federal and state governments are both moving more and more towards regional. So they're creating more and more grants and situations where you collaborate with somebody else in order to be eligible for the grant, especially when it comes to infrastructure, and that's community type and inner city. But so I hope that we can do that. And that goes back to our other thing about involvement and how we get a lobbyist, because there's two ways to lobby. Having done it, I understand this. And that is, one is you lobby the legislators, but the legislators don't actually do the work. They glad hand you, they make the speeches, they're the face. People do the work of the staff, just like in our city. We're the face up here, but those, you guys are the ones who do the work. And that's the fact of life. So you need lobbyists that know that and know who's in what office, and which one has to be talked to for what you're doing. In the city, it would be, who do you talk to for the library? Who do you talk to for administrative services? Who do you talk to for other things? And I get that question even from citizens. So if we're going to go out and do this, and that goes into our stuff with Cal Cities, National League of Cities, and those things too, because as you and I both know, they have many divisions. It's not just the electeds that go there. It's city managers that go there. It's police chiefs that go there. It's different fire departments that go there. They each have their own position on these committees. And the cities that are involved are the ones that get the voice. So if we're going to make a push in that direction, I hope that as we look at how we're spending that money, keep that in mind and get our different people positioned in the right place. Being small, we don't have a lot of staff that we can release for days at a time, but many of these meetings just as a quick up and down. And so much training is available through those organizations that would replace a lot of this other thing about getting companies. One thing problem I have with grant companies is they've got so many clients that it becomes cookie cutter. And pretty soon your grant looks just like everybody else's. That's what I don't want, because when they're being evaluated back there in Washington, D.C. or Sacramento, they're looking at what's special. And that's why we have to have our brand on it. Our people have to know what they're doing so they can get that human element in there. Because without that human element, nothing's going to happen. So those are my concerns, and I hope those are being paid attention to. Software. As we're getting this software, I'm looking at what's the lifespan of that software. This is expensive stuff. But how many times have any of us had software that worked great, and all of a sudden there's a new operating system and the software won't work anymore because it won't work with that operating system? I don't want to see us having to go $90,000 a year every year to keep doing the same thing over and over and over. So I hope that we have a way to protect against that and pay attention to that very, very closely. And are you to think, is that on the radar?
Yeah, so let me, I'll start with the grant first. One of the elements that we're evaluating as we're looking at the firms that provide these services is, from a regional perspective, where else within, let's say, SLO County are they working? Because we fully recognize that there are grants and there are funding availability that relies on that regionalism. So that is an evaluation element that we're taking into consideration as we make a decision on a recommendation to bring back to you all. And then on your comment about the staff and the lobbying, we agree that there are opportunities to get in front of folks that may not be elected, and that's as important as making sure that we continue our good relationships with our electeds at the state and federal level. And right now, with the exception of transportation, where we do have a dedicated consultant in that arena, there are probably opportunities. I know there are opportunities for improvement, and that's what this is going to help with, is again, creating that consistent presence and voice in front of those folks that need to hear our message and need to hear the opportunities that exist to invest in this community. So I would expect that part of the scope of work would be just that. It's not just showing up at elected officials' offices, really digging in the trenches and getting some of that dirty work done, in terms of the work that needs to get done there. And then in terms of the software, I may look to Dave or Melissa on this one just for a bit more detail, but the one-time cost, I understand that that's a large dollar amount, but from then on, typically the programs we're looking at are cloud-based, would be updated regularly. Now, I don't know when a product may become obsolete. We see that from time to time, but from a compatibility standpoint and from a longevity standpoint, I think the path that we're on is most likely going to be the best bang for the buck for the city if the council chooses to allow us to move forward with that software.
Okay. All right. They don't want to say anything. That's fine. And I think you've indicated. You're looking into that. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
it's something we're considering.
Then I do have a question also for Ryan. Utility billing.
Yes, sir.
We have outsourced it in the past, and a lot of our citizens feel like they're out of touch with us. So if they have a complaint or they want information, they get lost. Is this going to be in-house now that we've moved it in here into the department? Is it going to be an in-house billing?
I'm sorry, utility billing, so water and sewer billing has always been in-house. That has never gone out-house or outside of the organization. So we do have utility billing staff on 8 to 5 Monday through Friday to help any customer questions, comments, concerns, and the like.
Okay.
We do have more recently have had problems with our meter reading company. So we have a separate company that goes through and reads all of our meters each month.
Oh.
They've been delayed, which then has caused delays throughout the process.
All right. See, I was lumping that together with utility billing because you can't bill without the information.
Right. So we still have the in-house UB staff. They would just be going to a different department. And then when we this is a little preview to when we get to the utilities department, there is a proposal to look at automated meter reading in the next 2-year cycle.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's it.
Councilwoman Garcia?
Well, I just had a question on the grant writing, but I think we've gone over that. So like Mr. Strong was saying, to put that personal touch on there, I know that we have community partnerships. And when that grant writer would have questions about our actual town data information, hope that person would be able to reach out to give that personal touch that we have here.
Yeah, absolutely. For any of the projects that would be an opportunity for a grant application, it's going to be based partially on the merit of that project in relationship to the grant program, and partially on the story that our staff will still have to help tell, with input from the community. That's going to be an absolute important part of any grant application. What the grant writer will help us do, or writers, because typically there's a team, is they help staff understand which elements of the grant are going to be a bit more focused on by the agency that's rating the application, helping guide us in some of those areas. But the merits of the project and the story that we're going to have to tell, there's still going to be legwork that staff's going to have to do to give that to the grant writer so they can package it up.
Perfect. And we keep talking about being transparent to the community. And when we have those grant writing opportunities, would we be able to put those on the website? So if someone out there has a story to add to that could be helpful, would that be on there?
So I think there's always room for engagement with these grant applications. Typically, I would say 95%, if not all, of these grant applications essentially require community outreach and input. So we'll definitely be working through our civic engagement coordinator and with the departments to make sure that we're not only checking that box, we're exceeding that box in terms of the input in the story that we can tell. So okay. Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
So a couple of questions, just touching on the grants one more time. Much seems to be moving towards regional right now. So our history and our modus operandi has been grant writing for Paso Robles, grant writing for law enforcement, grant writing for fire, grant writing for, but they're all Paso Robles situations. What type of strategy is going to be employed with the proposed grant writing assistance to take advantage of the regional alliances that we've started building? The alliances with Cal Poly, the alliances with our neighbors to the north, the alliances with REACH and regional economic development.
So two thoughts on that, Mayor. As I mentioned earlier, one, we're looking at different firms, but there are some firms that have a bit more experience in the region than others, and so we think those relationships will be critical. If there are opportunities for regional collaboration, I haven't gotten this level of detail just yet because we're not at the finish line with the recommendation, but certainly a question that we can ask is, for an example, if the city of Paso Robles is the lead on a grant application related to broadband and Atascadero is a partner through an MOU, will you take the lead in writing this grant application on behalf of that, of the two entities? I haven't crossed that bridge, but it's a good question to ask, and I certainly will, and we'll wrap that up as part of our consideration, but I think there is some opportunity there.
I think it's a kind of a paradigm shift in perspective from what we've done in decades past, and the broader base of support that we get for some of these programs. I think the more hearing we're going to get at the levels that are necessary to fund them. Back to the compensation study expenses, are those going to survey private sector comparisons with city positions? Because we always hear, the private sector pays this and public sector pays this, and does that figure into how we evaluate compensation for?
I missed the first couple of words of yours, but I think you said class and comp as I listened to your question throughout. So yes, part of the class and comp study will look at the private industry, just again as a pulse. One of the classic examples is the Atascadero Water Mutual Company. They're a direct competitor, right? We have water maintenance folks that will look to that agency to move to, but they're not a public agency. So yeah, getting that data is a little bit more difficult than say in the city of Atascadero.
Yeah. The administrative assistant that's being proposed, how does that fit into the organizational flow chart? Who would that person report to? How does that work?
I'll say it. We'll report to Ty. How about that? We'll start there. But it would be in the city manager's office. It would be proposed to be located actually where Melissa is today, kind of being that first person that you see and hear when you walk into the city manager's office.
Okay, and then under the heading of economic development, what kind of support are we going to have internally for economic development efforts? Our economic development manager going to conferences, traveling to meet other people, how is that going to be?
So we've built into the budget what I would call a pretty robust business development budget that includes monies for travel. I think it's about $7,500. It's pretty significant. We've got close to $30,000 for those business tools. Some of those are Paul is currently evaluating, and these are data analytics type tools. And then I think part of what's going to drive some of the money that we have in the budget and the use of it, not all of it's committed just yet, is the outcome of the Economic Development Strategic Plan update. And so as we get closer to finishing that process, which will probably start here hopefully in the next 3 to 4 weeks, as we get closer to that coming to fruition, we'll likely be back to the City Council as an update, obviously, and then hopefully an adoption of that plan, and then a refresh on what's in the ED budget and available for investment. But we've built in dollars into that budget to be prepared for those next steps, including a business, again, what I'm calling development and outreach budget. So there is money there for that, yes.
On the issue of software obsolescence, I'm afraid as someone who is a fairly heavy user of computers and software, that's the way of the world. Nobody has yet written the ultimate piece of software that will never be improved upon. So I think the answer to that has to be vigilance in changes in the market, changes in the services, and some sort of planned succession strategy for software so we aren't caught flat-footed. I mean, obviously, we know this is going to be an ongoing expense. We just don't want it to be an emergency expense. That being said, I think that software, and I think Councilman Hammond alluded to it, this type of tool allows us to extend the abilities and capacity of our staff, which is probably a cost saving over extending the staff. So certainly in favor of that. I'm wondering if there are other communication technologies that we can use to enhance services such as collecting data from meters. There are smart meter systems out there which, once installed, report electronically, and we don't have to have people riding around reading meters. Is that something that's on the horizon?
Yes, I'm not mistaken. Mr. Cornell or Mr. Aleckel can probably speak to it, but we just had a discussion the other day about potentially piloting some meters that will allow for remote reading. So that's happening across the organization as we're considering, I can speak specifically in the case of the agenda prep software. Do we bring you, frankly, a request for another staff member, like a deputy type position, or are we able to chip away for the time being with some additional investment that maybe is not a staff member?
Right.
And that's happening across the organization.
And then also speaking to the issue of transparency, do council expenses fall in the administrative budget?
Yes.
So right now, we don't see a breakout on council expenses, stipends, travel, health insurance, things like that. Is that something that could be broken out in the future so people can see exactly what?
It depends on what level of detail right now in each individual department overviews for the city manager's office. It will break down each division. So there's city council as a division as a whole that's shown there, but it doesn't break out personnel versus operating versus technology needs.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Okay, thank you.
Okay. I guess it's back on me, huh? So the next three departments, or really two departments that exist today, are community services and public works is the last two that we haven't discussed. And the majority of the discussion, or at least the first part of the discussion, is going to be kind of the organizational restructuring. It's those two departments that have had the biggest impact from the reorg that we're proposing. And so very simply put, the new utilities department will take the water, the wastewater functions out of the public works is today and create a new utilities department. As I mentioned, a utility billing division, admin services go to utilities as well. And then with the changes with the state law and recycle and waste and SB 1383 and the needs that legislative entails, we're proposing a fourth division out of the utilities, and that's the solid waste division. In that is embedded not only is the solid waste coordinator that's going to be part of the 218 process that Paso Robles Waste and Recycle is going to endure in the next year or so, but it also moves the landfill maintenance and operations out of the general fund and puts it in this new standalone solid waste fund. Now, the way this new solid waste fund is, it's still going to almost work as almost like a sub general fund quasi, but the tipping fees that we get from the landfill will still go in and be deposited into the general fund. And then the general fund will do a transfer out of it to the solid waste fund for whatever operational needs the landfill or the solid waste fund needs at that time. The new public works department retains the street maintenance. It retains the stormwater. Those two functions get combined to kind of a hardscape maintenance kind of component. Capital projects remains the same. That still stays there. And then so is the airport operations. Those functions aren't moving anywhere. But we are proposing moving some of the landscape lighting district, trees, medians, and those kind of similar functions from community services to public works. So what that leaves in community services is parks and trail maintenance is that leftover division. So now community services will have library, it will have recreation, parks and trail maintenance, and then you'll kind of see when we dive into supplemental requests, kind of a homelessness support services leg of the operations as well. So for community services, again, all the prior years are realigned as if the rework happened back in 1920. And so community services over the past few years have seen expenditures right around $5 million and has staffing equivalents of 28 to 29 people. That's including the part-timers that we equivalent them. So a part-timer could be a 0.45 FTE. And so even though they have 29 FTEs, there's much more people and volunteers that they have to maintain and supervise. And then as you can see in the outer years, again, there's investments into this department as well, but they're all based on the strategic plans that council approved earlier this year. So the library, again, solely based on the strategic plan, calls out for a technical services librarian in the first year, and outreach services librarian in the second year. I may have those backwards, but one in 1 year and one in the other. And then the graphic design administrative assistant in the first year. Then a marketing plan for about $50,000. That's a one-time cost. And then for the recreational services side of the operation, again, these are based on the strategic plans that were approved by council earlier. It calls for a volunteer coordinator in the first year, a couple additional part-time recreation staff assistants in the first year, and then a second or third part-time staff in the second year. And then also in that second year of the budget is converting the aquatics manager from part-time status to full-time year-round status. Moving on to the other legs of the operation, the trail and maintenance function, there's proposal to add 2 maintenance specialists. This will help, and this will put more hours towards the maintenance at Barney Sports Park and all the parks throughout the city. And then at the city council's last meeting, an allocation of $444,000 to ECHO. It is plugged in the budget, is assumed in there, and for the supplemental request, that's $222,000 each year for the 2 year. And then as far as the new public works department goes, so this department has the kind of the biggest impacts or the biggest staffing augmentations needed to make the reorg happen. Very specifically, in order for the reorg to happen, we would need to add in 1 new public works operations manager. That would be the manager that's overseeing both the street maintenance and the stormwater maintenance functions of the operations. We would need a new landscape supervisor position, because the parks and trail supervisor would still stay retained in community services. So we need another landscape supervisor in public works, and then 3 additional support underneath that supervisor to help with the meetings and trees and that kind of that landscape related maintenance. Again, this is kind of a break off of, we have parks and trees and street trees and median staff. Now we're breaking those 2 operations off. So in order for both of those operations to be functional and work efficiently, we need to add those 5 positions there. In addition to the reorganizational positions, we have supplemental requests. The first one is reclassing a staff engineer in the capital projects division and reclassing it to an assistant capital projects engineer. The envision of this new position is pretty much a second DETAS, someone that's going to be able to take on projects themselves, street projects, and really kind of increase the amount of street maintenance that we could do in any given year. The second request has to do, this is actually more of a joint request or interdepartmental one with public safety and public works. This is radio intersection controls. This is for emergency services and police staff to be able to communicate the signals as they're returning to an emergency response. So that project to hit a couple of those signals is slated for the first year. And then there's a kind of a variety of city trees and pool covers and carpet replacements that deferred maintenance is being proposed. I think it's in the neighborhood of about $30,000 to $35,000, so very kind of minor in this request. And then lastly, a facilities maintenance specialist, someone to kind of help with the janitorial work at the Public Safety Center in the second year. And then lastly is the new utilities department. And so, again, there really isn't a whole lot of change when we're picking up water and wastewater. We're not adding really any functions to the department quite yet. And yeah, years 2 and 3, or the first and second year, we had the solid waste functions, but those are kind of very minor out of the gate. Again, you'll see that weird little blue line kind of straighten across the screen there. Again, the landfill operations were part of the general fund in the last 2 years. Now moving forward, they'll be part of the new standalone fund. So now the utilities department won't have any sort of general fund sources to fund their operations. That's the wrong keyboard. And then lastly, on the reorg structure, the only additional position needed for the reorg is the utilities director. And then the supplemental requests include a SGMA compliance manager. So this is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is starting to gear up and making sure that we have a good plan, and we're implementing the SGMA plan, or the sustainable water plan there. So that staff is going to help manage that program. Secondly, and I had mentioned this earlier, the Paso Robles Waste and Recycle, when they were going to do their 218 process, that have it so that they could fund a fully staffed position for the city. They kind of coordinate all the nuances of SB 1390 or SB 1383. And then just going to keep in the back of your mind, where when we get to the capital projects, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but there is a future recycled water project that's in the queue. And so as we bring that new system online, that'll create a whole new leg of operations that we'll need staffing to fund and maintain there. So out of the utilities, about 16% of the overall staffing comes out of utilities. And so I did a little math of doing utility staff, police department staff, and fire department staff, and that totals a 63%. So almost 2/3 of the overall workforce of the city comes from police, fire, or utilities. Mr. Mayor, that's the end of the department overview, so we'll ask questions on the reorg, and then I would suggest a break.
Council questions? John?
Maybe one. I think there was and I'm not sure where you had it there, Ryan, but with regard to the maintenance and I guess cleaning of the emergency center, is it going to be one individual that does that whole building every day, every week, or can he be shared with this facility as well, City Hall? Rita?
That's exactly the plan. Currently, we have one facilities maintenance professional cleaning the public safety center on a minimal level. If we add someone else, they can have that facility, take care of that facility as well as serve as a building attendant here, so that this building has more consistent level of service instead of just in the evening.
Right now, we're contracting out this building, aren't we?
We are contracting this building.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. On we go.
Okay. We're about halfway through the presentation. I don't know if you want to take an actual break or...
What, 5 minutes?
Yeah,
sure. We'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, we've wound up our break. We're going to call the meeting back to order. We're going to continue with our presentation with our budget workshop tonight, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Cornell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the second part of the council presentation this evening pretty much gets to the point now where how do we pay for it all? And so the next series of slides is a lot of numbers, but the context behind all those numbers have already been discussed with the department overviews. And so jumping right kind of into it with revenues by type. So each one of the different colors represents a different revenue source or revenue stream. With sales tax, property tax, and TOT being, again, the three biggest revenue sources for the city. It represents right about 75 to 80% of the There we go. Okay.
Now, to be clear, this is strictly operating budget, correct?
This is strictly general fund operating ongoing revenues, correct. During the original February City Council goals and workshop, we did a 10-year forecast during that time. The revenue projections have been updated since then favorably, but they haven't really changed all that dramatically. We're seeing a huge increase coming out of the pandemic, double-digit increases in TOT, both in 2021 and in this year too. But moving forward, we're projecting the revenues to start flattening. 1 to 3% increases in the second year, or first and second years. So not the double-digit increases like we've have been seeing coming out of the pandemic. So $52.9 million is the projected revenue in the first year, and 54.3 is this total revenue in the second year. And so it's our starting point. And so we first go through baseline expenditures. That's just taking operations as they are today. We're not adding anybody. We're not doing any of the supplemental requests that we went through. And if we were just to do that, our operating surplus would be 2.6 in the first year and 3.2 million in the second year. And so when we start overlaying the ongoing supplemental requests, not the one-time supplemental request, but the ongoing supplemental requests, that's all of the additional personnel, some of the enhancements that have ongoing components to it. Those total about 2 million in the first year and about $2.8 million in the second year. And so now our operating surplus is still a surplus, about 644 in the first year and 361,000 in the second year, which in pretty much in my world, that pretty much is a zero-sum budget. That goes to zero, and it is balanced. Mr. Gregory.
Ryan, are you maintaining our current surplus outside of this?
So the next section of it is diving into reserves and all the one-time expenditures and what the reserve levels do after that. Okay, so this is how we fund the ongoing stuff, where we're still balanced. Again, I do want to emphasize that the budget does assume that 100% of the revenues are collected, that are received, and 100% of the expenditures are expended. So there's no budget savings. Every position that we hired is hired on July 1 and fully loaded. So I say that we did this exercise, so can we afford this today? And it is. We know we can afford it today. So as we implement this plan over the next two or 3 years, we know that we're financially sound on an ongoing basis. We're in the black. But taking that in consideration general fund reserves, it is estimated that at June 30th of this year, our general fund reserves will be approaching $30 million, which represents about 56% of general fund revenues. So it's a very healthy and very solid reserves. Let me find my spot. So it's at 56% of revenue is about $15.9 million more than the minimum required council policy of 30% of revenues. In addition to the $29.8 million, we also have a little more than $10 million projected in the Section 115 trust. So the Section 115 trust, the money that we set aside for future pension expenses, is not factored into this fund balance. That's a whole other separate pot of money. So staff is projecting, and we'll kind of dive into these in the next few slides, but here are the one-time use of reserves that's kind of listed there on the right-hand side. Nothing is new that hasn't already been talked about, except for the capital projects. And so that's kind of the next series of slides that we're going to kind of go over, is what the one-time use of capital projects are. So here it is listed here. The first one is the Nibike Street Corridor Project. This was kind of a larger envision all the way from pretty much Spring Street all the way to Creston of this big enhancement, safety enhancement. So we actually recently submitted for a grant, a $17.6 million total project with the local match of $3.5 million. We should know about December time if we were awarded that grant. And so right now, the 3.5 local match is just more of a placeholder so that if we do get awarded that project or that grant, we can fund the project. One of the major themes you're going to hear when we get to the capital projects segment, again, is get shovel ready. So the general funds reserve portion of getting some of those projects shovel ready, especially when it comes to the Warrow Creek and the Highway 46 overcrossing, is about $2 million slotted in the next 2 years, over the next 2 years. As Warren mentioned during his department reviews, we have the Mill Road annexation proposal. That's at 560. Again, on Warren's, the traffic signal enhancements in the river path ring connector at 250,000 and $1 million respectfully. Again, when we get to these next two, we'll have a whole separate section on the capital project. So I'm not going to get specific on the capital project. I'm just kind of showing what the general fund reserves portion and which we're recommending those one-time use of reserves are going towards. But so at the end of the day, in this 2-year proposal, we are proposing using $13.1 million of one-time use of reserves. That would drop the reserves down at June 30th at the end of your 2-year cycle at about $20.7 million, which represents 36% of revenues. So about 6% more than the minimum required reserve, about $3.4 million over the minimum required. So not using 100% of the the reserves over and beyond the council minimum policy. Again, just want to re-emphasize that this does assume that 100% of the revenues are collected and 100% of the expenditures are expended. So we know that in any given year, we're 95 to 97% of appropriations. I think in this 2-year cycle, because of all the additional positions, we're going to see a higher budget or salary savings in those first couple of years while we get these people on board. And so I think that the reserves are going to be very solid even at the end of this 2-year cycle with all this kind of one-time budget savings. But again, the whole exercise was, can we afford it today? If we were fully implemented today, can we afford it? And the answer is yes. Some other schedules that are part of the City Council staff report that I just want to make sure that you're aware of them. In attachment number 2, the very first 2 schedules are what I like to call the 10,000-foot overview of the city operations overall. It lists each of the city departments down in rows, and then in columns it shows projected reserve balances at the beginning of the year, revenues, expenses, and then projected ending year reserves for every city fund. Again, those are more in summary, so revenues are shown in total, but then the schedules behind those summaries breaks down in a little bit more detail. So you have the general fund, so you'll see how much is projected for property tax, sales tax, TOT, and the like. Same with the downtown parking fund. All the internal service funds are shown in attachment number 2.
So Ryan, may I just ask a question? So on these items here, they're accounted for in the surpluses for the next 2 years?
So all the numbers presented tonight are all consistent. All the schedules should tie to one another. So the staff report to what's in the schedules to what's been
excluding any capital expenditures.
So the capital expenditures, no, the capital expenditures are part of the schedules too. What I just went over was just the general funded portion of the capital projects.
Okay.
After we get done with this, these budget schedules of these,
Here it is, right?
we'll go more specific on capital projects and dive. It's more complicated with capital projects because sometimes there's several different funding sources. It's not only just the general fund. And then, so attachment number 3, it kind of gives a more of a better report on the department overviews that we just went over with City Council, but it does kind of show the department expenditures, how that compares to the rest of the general fund. It definitely lists out each of the positions within the department, what's proposed, or what's the current positions are at today, what's proposed in the next year and then the year after that, and then the funding sources both by the fund and by division in the program. And then lastly is attachment number 4, which is the kind of the citywide personnel staffing plan. It really breaks down each individual staff member in the city, where they're going if they're part of the reorg, and additions to by department. So before we get to capital projects, I just want to kind of pause and answer any questions that council might have with the.
Council questions?
No.
I think we're good.
So the next meaty piece of this presentation too is the capital projects. And so we kind of broke down capital projects this year in these kind of general categories, some miscellaneous projects, really specifically to facilities. There's a whole slew of parks and rec and quality of life amenities that we want to improve. We're going to spend a lot of time on major infrastructure. Those are all our bridges, and so we'll spend some time there. We'll talk a little bit about road maintenance and what the plan is for the next 5 years or so, and then we'll get through the enterprise funds. So real quick on the miscellaneous and facilities funds, we have about 6 or 7 projects listed there on the left. I think I mentioned some of these are already in some detail. So the Public Safety Center has a camera upgrade system that's being proposed. This is replacing all the exterior cameras outside the building, as well as some interview room cameras within the facility. This is a one-time Measure J20 of $180,000 proposal. We have the Library City Hall expansion, the design cost only piece. Again, we're trying to get to that shovel-ready status, and so the design is currently estimated at about $2.5 million. We still have some leftover proceeds from developer impact fees that was to be used for City Hall expansion. So it's not general funded funds that's being proposed in this next year. It's going to be some of those developer fee funds, and then construction. Potentially in the third and fourth year of the overall kind of 5-year plan. So outside of this budget cycle is kind of where we're thinking construction would be. And once we get their design, we'll kind of come up with a strategy on how we could fund the construction of the facility.
Question real quick. On the corporation yard, I heard a number kicking around 11 million. It looks like it's more in line about 9 million for the corporation yard. I mean, that's what it looks like as far as budgeted anyway, funding sources.
Okay, hold on. So okay, we're going to go to the corp yard. So in the corporation, there's actually 3 columns there.
Right.
So we have a general fund reserves. We're kind of earmarking $218,000 of general fund reserves towards the corporation yard construction. We're earmarking $4.1 million of developer impact fees towards the project. That's the general government one that's collected for expansion of general government services. And then the plan is to move some water and wastewater personnel out of this city hall offices over there. And then that is appropriate to charge proportionally the water and sewers allocation to that too. Okay, right. So these are preliminary numbers. These are just kind of estimates and kind of where we're thinking going. The design is going, it's just under, is it already approved? Is it already approved? Next council, yeah, that's the timing. At the next council meeting, the design is going to be brought forth to City Council for about $900,000 for the courtyard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The price tag is still hovering around 11 million.
11 million. Yeah, when you add up, when it's all said and done.
Any other questions before we go on?
To go back up a spot, there's again that other half of the variety of City Hall library repairs. Part of it includes fixing some of the automatic doors. Some of it's fixing the stucco repair, the stucco outside and the like. The next one, skipping courtyard, going down to fire station number 3. The construction of fire station 3 is budgeted and appropriated, so that's in the current year. It's not shown here. But the next phase is that training facility and behind it. So the $1 million is the design of the training facility. We're estimating about $2.5 million for the actual construction of the facility. The police substation and evidence storage room at Second One Way, kind of mentioned this to you earlier tonight. We have design already under contract in the current year, and the cost estimate from that design process slated about $2.3 million for improvements at that facility. So that's slated in there to use Measure J20. And then lastly, the Public Safety Center's roof does need replacement. We did some minor repairs this fiscal year to kind of get us through, but there's $800,000 needed for to replace that entirety of that roof and the tiles needed there. We're thinking that we could push this off another year, so we're actually scheduling this project about July time of 2023, so it's in the beginning of the next fiscal year.
Hopefully it's not raining. Yeah. I didn't know we had a problem on the roof, do we? I guess it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a long, involved story, but suffice it to say that it should be under warranty.
Yeah.
It's not, because the manufacturer has filed bankruptcy and is And so we're kind of stuck with a bill that we hadn't anticipated a bit early. So Frida has been working on getting that squared away.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to our Parks and Recreation projects. Again, these were kind of all listed in the staff report too, so I don't necessarily want to go line by line, but there are improvements throughout a variety of all of our parks, Party Sports Parks, Larry Moore Park, Centennial, repairing and rehabbing trails, fixing some of the floors at the gymnasium and the banquet rooms. We also have I want to point out there at the very last item, the Veteran Center patio shade structure is being proposed to in that first year for $150,000. And then, like I had mentioned earlier tonight, the River Path Ring Connector at $1 million. That's over 2 years. For the capital project, I kind of just did what's going to be appropriated in the 2 years and added them. So some of them will be in the first year and some of them will be in the second year. But is there any questions, I guess, with any of these potential projects?
Seeing none.
And then we get into the major infrastructure, and this is kind of, I have more slides that I'll get in more depth after this, but as you can see, we're slotting to do about $36 million worth of infrastructure projects in 22-23, and another $37 million in 23-24. So significant investments in our infrastructure, and really, that's the goal, to try to get it shovel ready. So for Crescent Road, this is to repave and rehab the entire segment, right from River all the way to, well, at least the Golden Hills, hopefully to Crescent, but we'll kind of see as the project goes along and where Red-Tail Apartments is. But the project is slated to start construction after we finish Union Road and Golden Hill Roundabout. We didn't want to impact the transportation, the circulation of the city traffic too much while everything's under construction. So as soon as that roundabout is done, we'll get going on Crescent Road. This includes not only the repaving, but the installation of sidewalks and gutters and creeks and the like. This is partly funded with grants. We got a slow call grant for about $185,000 and a CTC grant for $600,000. So on the left is kind of how the $4.2 million project is being funded. About half of it is coming from those supplemental sales tax overrides. Moving on to two other transportation projects, the 24th Street Bridge. This isn't a new project. This one's currently underway. It does assume that in the second year there's a $14 million grant for construction of it, and so there will be a local match requirement about $2 million, which is slated to use transportation impact fees for. I had mentioned this again earlier too when we were talking about one-time use of general fund reserves and the corridor project. Again, this is part of the complete and sustainable street plan. The grant request is about $14.1 million. The local match is about 3.5, and we'll know in December if we were awarded that grant. And so if we are not awarded the grant, that $3.5 million, even though it's appropriated, kind of just would revert back to general fund reserves, if that were the case. Where Creek, so this is kind of one of the three major bridges that we need to build over the next several years. Slotted at total cost, that's the construction of the bridge, it's the road construction, the right-of-way acquisitions, and the construction of the trail is slated about $26.5 million. And so it's a huge project for the city to undertake. The proposal for the first year is only to do what's emboldened to get funding for the environmental permits and get funding for some of the right-of-way acquisitions needed. Again, we have a $14.8 million project that we need to figure out, and it's going to be kind of a mixture of developer fees, right? Developer impact fees or developer reimbursements. We have transit funds that could go towards some of the paving of those roads, but then the large majority will likely come from some sort of debt proceeds, have it be a bond or some sort of financing. And then for the trail construction, it's a linear park. It's actually quite extensive, but the whole goal and the hope is to get an $8 million grant to do that, and it would be an 80-20 matching grant there. In addition to those two bolded things I kind of put in there too, there's also another $500,000 for the road construction. The blue part of the road there on the right, part of it's actually being constructed with typical normal development, but we need those roads actually upgraded more than what the development needs. So we're going to kind of get into developer reimbursement so that the road can sustain some heavy truck traffic when that time comes.
So may I ask a question on this one? Can someone explain what the trail construction is, please?
You're not on yet.
What's
There
that?
you go.
Okay.
You're on now. Melissa just got you.
So this is a comprehensive transportation project that includes not only the road, the bridge, the roundabout, but also the bike and ped trail along Wero Creek. We really need all those to maximize the ability for the project to qualify for state grant funding. So the trail is a key component. If we don't get those grants, the standalone piece is basically the $14 million. So we can just build that, and then the $10 million for the trail project could be a future one. That's there really to make it more competitive for grants. So if we got a larger grant that then covered that, then that would make sense to include that in the construction.
So the 26 million's including everything.
That's the full completed project that we're hoping to get grant funded.
So we get grant funded for the trail construction, it makes us more competitive to get grant funding for the rest of the project.
Correct.
I understand.
Thank
you. That lowered the budget a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah.
Some other kind of miscellaneous transportation projects. We have a grant application into SLOCOG to do the pedestrian enhancements at near Flemson School. I don't know if you recall, council approved kind of the preliminary design on some of the bulb outs and the crosswalks enhancements that's slated for over there. Last year, you adopted the local roadway safety plan, and we started slotting about $50,000 of TIF monies per year towards that program. So that continues on in the next 2-year cycle. Similarly, the ADA transition plan to help alleviate some of our Americans with Disabilities Act, curb ramps and sidewalks and the like. We slotted $500,000 per year last year out of the general fund. That continues in the next 2-year cycle as well. And then lastly, the Highway 46 West roundabout. This is kind of phase 3 of the project, and we'll kind of show when I talk to the Vine Street what we're talking about. But this is 100% funded by SLOCOG. The only city cost of this is DEDIS's time. And so this is to get the project specification estimates completed so that we can move forward with that phase when that's ready to go.
So Ryan, is that the whole roundabout's funded by this?
Just the design of it.
Okay, thank you.
And so kind of right while we're kind of in that similar area too, this is the South Vine Streets. This is how the road realigns up to Theater Drive. The green part is phase 1 that's already happened. That's kind of over by Target. The orange phase is what we're proposing being in construction in the next 5-year horizon. And then the red part is the phase 3, the future roundabouts. And so the design for the South Vine Street Bridge and realignment is fully funded. We're just kind of waiting on some developer underground utilities until we can finalize those designs. So those are ready to go. However, the construction cost for that bridge and the road realignment is around $18.5 million. And then we do kind of a proposed funding strategy to get that whole project fully over the finish line. That includes using the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act that the feds gave due to COVID, the pandemic, about $4.2 million. So that leaves about $1 million or so for pickleball and potentially homelessness services out of ARPA. There is a developer requirement. The developer is required to pave and to construct their portion of the road. So even though it seems like the city's going to be the one contractor or managing the contract, we'll get it reimbursed from the developer for their segment of the road. Slotting to use $2 million in transit funds. This is something new. So we do get allocations from the state for transit services. And so usually those funds get used by the Regional Transport Authority, right, RTA, for the operations. But every once in a while, their operational costs come in lower, which we get to actually retain the difference from what the state grant allotted our city and what the services for RTA provide. And part of the restrictions on the transit funds, we actually can use it for repaving roads and constructing roads. It's transit related. So that's kind of the proposal, to use $2 million out of that bucket of money towards the South Vine Street to get those roads constructed. Mentioned about $1.3 million in general fund reserves, and then we're looking about an $8 million debt issuance, have it be a bond or a revenue bond or something of the like. The revenue projections, because the whole reason why we're doing this not the whole reason why we're doing it, but the majority of the reason why we're doing this whole road and realignment was part of the development agreement for that resort that's going out there. And so the proceeds, the tax revenue proceeds from the resort and all the increase in property tax revenues, because the property tax values of those properties are going to go up significantly. It's where the city's going to see more revenue coming out of that property than it is today, which will be, I'm preliminarily guessing about 50% of the debt service needed to pay it back, that $8 million.
Are we making any headway with the county on our property tax share thing going on?
I do know that they contracted with a consultant to look at the study. Chris, do you have a better update?
Yeah, the consultant continues to work on that project. They're doing a fiscal analysis for all the cities involved right now, so it's a top to bottom review of every budget. So that's the longest part of the process, and that's the one we're in right now. So we're still engaged with the consultant. I don't have any further numbers or prediction to share with you at this point.
Well, that's a good way to approach it too, Chris, because I think, again, all the other cities need it just as bad as we do, with other projects that they have too. So that's a good idea. Thanks.
So Ryan, the 18.5 million, does that include just the bridge or both parts of the roads?
It includes all of the orange.
Okay.
Includes the bridge, the road, and the underground of the utilities.
So we're looking at an $8 million debt service on that, whatever that may be. Thank you.
Other questions? No? Thank you.
The largest of the three bridges. So this is the 46 East and Union Road overcrossing. Again, the focus here is to get that shovel ready. So we do have the preliminary design and the final design, the preliminary design funded and underway. The final design is what's being proposed in this next 2-year cycle, 1.55 million of city local resources, and then 1.55 from SLOCOG to kind of do that joint effort to finish the design of this overcrossing. But the overcrossing, it's a lot of money. We're talking about $59.2 million of not only bridge construction, but again, there's a lot of right-of-way acquisitions needed for that one as well. And so as of right now, the preliminary funding strategy is to again use another bucket of the transit funds, use all the remaining money that we have out of the transportation impact fees, and then the big elephant in the room is seeing if we get that $50 million grant to actually construct the overcrossing. If we do get the $50 million grant, now we're looking at about $6.1 million of kind of a debt issuance potentially, but other funding source doesn't come up. Okay. But I think the plan for the next 2 years is just to get this one shovel ready as far as possible. Here are the list of the street segments that are due for maintenance in the next 2-year cycle. We still need to do some fine tuning, but I think just if you look at the bottom row there, we're looking at about $10 to $12 million of road improvements over the next 2 years. We do need to look at that country club area that's slated for $3.6 million. We need to move that in the first year because council advanced that project sooner than it was originally slated for. So that's kind of our plan. That's the 6-year plan that council approved back in February of 2019 or 2020. It's February, I know that it was that month. So we're just continuing to develop that 6-year street plan. And then about a year into this budget cycle, we're going to relook at the streets and kind of figure out what's the next 5-year, 10-year plan is on the timing of our repavement of the streets. Oh, hold on. Actually, let me go back one more. They got a little out of order. I actually just noticed that earlier. So the last two ones are the enterprise funds, the water line, the water projects. We have some water line replacements. Those are kind of the typical replacing water lines. I did want to point out that we do have the automated meter readers here as a placeholder. That's a $3 million project as of right now, but it's very possible that it'll increase because we are looking at different technologies. This is very preliminary at this moment in time, but we do definitely like the features where we get 15-minute read data through the cloud, so anybody could log in, even a customer and us could log in, see the water use kind of real time.
We're going to require that on all new construction, aren't we? I mean,
well. So interesting. The device, and Christopher could speak to it a little bit more too. It sounds like there's actually a piece in our current meters that we could remove and dump in there at a cheaper cost that'll be able to do that.
Without having to tear the whole thing apart?
Right.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we've standardized around Badger meters for single-family residential and as much as we can with the larger commercial meters. And Badger offers a product that allows us, as well as another company offers products that would allow us just to replace those registers and install new registers without replacing the entire meter. So in the areas where, we've been putting a lot of time, effort, and money into upgrading our meters throughout the city, they allow us to retain the actual meters themselves and swap out the registers. What we're looking at here, we're probably total project cost if we were to go with a system that there's a few different systems we're evaluating. One of them is a simple drive-by technology where you would drive into a neighborhood and get one data point for the entire month and then use that in order to generate the bills. The other type of system we're looking at is the one like Ryan described. It's cellular based where we get close to real-time data from the customer. I think this is going to be important moving forward as the reporting requirements and uses of water are going to be more tightly controlled by the state, that we're going to have to understand really what is going towards landscape irrigation and what's being used for non-discretionary water use. So I really think we're going to evaluate both of those, but I really think we're leaning towards the cellular-based semi-real-time data systems, and we're going to be piloting those here very soon. We've already met with the manufacturers, some of the best manufacturers out there, reviewed their products, and are working out the details to set up some pilots in the city.
So Christopher, again, for all new construction though, are we going to adopt this particular meter that
if we can settle on a technology and a product that we want, then yes, we're going to do that. And maybe, the first few homes that go in might not have it, but as soon as we establish that new standard, and it will have to come to you. For the system like Ryan described, it's probably closer to $6 million for the entire city to convert both the residential and commercial meters. The drive-by systems are going to be significantly cheaper, but it's not going to provide that kind of data that we're going to need moving forward.
Well, I think, again, with the Olson and Beechwood tracks going in, I mean, it'd be easy to understand if they're really going to work or not, or at least to the point where we're getting some good data feedback from them instead of we going through the whole old town and doing all those changes.
We're going to start that pilot right away. So if we get a good feeling about a particular technology and that its workability, not just on collecting the data, but then interfacing that data with our billing system, we want to make sure that, once we're married to a technology in a particular product, it's going to be hard to go back. So we want to make sure and test it and make sure it's going to work for us.
Very good. Thank
Councilman Strong has been waiting patiently.
Yeah. Is Commerce Way in this year's budget, or did I miss something? Because that's almost a complete rebuild. Ryan?
I'm sorry?
Commerce Way. Is that in this year's budget, or did I miss something along here? That's a rebuild.
Oh, when is? It might be, it's probably
23.
Oh, Sarah Benita, Turtle Creek area.
Oh, is that what you're looking at?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Steve?
And Christopher, you could just nod. So is the money coming out of the enterprise fund for water for the meters? That was one question. And then how quick is the payback on that?
So yes, the money would come out of the enterprise fund, and we're going to be incorporating some numbers into we're in the process of performing a rate study right now. And as part of the capital component of that rate study, we'll be including this technology to make sure we're collecting the money necessary in order to do that transition.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does that become part of the new evaluation for the water rate as well?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I think we covered.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, that's right. One more thing on wastewater, the big project there has to do with the recycled water distribution system. We recently were kind of told that we received a grant to help build the distribution center. So the proposal for the next 2-year cycle is to get the recycled water line from the treatment plant today, where it's pretty much putting recycled water in the river, but get it under the river up to River Oaks 2, where that development's currently under construction, and tie up to the recycled water line they're currently building through that development. And so once we connect that connector to River Oaks, they're building it all the way through Buena Vista, so then we'll have the recycled water all the way to Buena Vista, which is kind of that first segment of the recycled water distribution system overall. Outside of that, there's just some lift station and some sewer line rehab out of the wastewater division. And then the details of the airport, which we're still kind of fine tuning, is in the staff report too. Those are preliminary. I'll do a full analysis on the airport projects at the June meeting. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Looks like we're kind of free-forming it tonight, so thanks for taking our questions on the fly. Any further questions on this section?
I do. Wow.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
It's kind of related to this section, but this is a question for our city manager. So there's a lot of really big projects depending on this or that or whatever happens on grants. Is there a way that we can have some kind of prioritization and I'll just explain the question. To me, the important ones are Vine Street Bridge, the corporate yard, basically are the two right now that we've got to go, and then where I was right behind it. So how are we going to do? Are we going to prioritize these, and how do we see that? How do we, one of the things, I understand all these items in the budget, but I want to get my head around the bigger number. And the J20 funds are there for a lot of the road projects, but it'd be interesting to see what else we have coming at us especially for where we're on Vine Street and the corporate yard. Just a way to me, the way I deal with budgets is if we know where the money's coming from, we could put that one to sleep and move on to the next one and try to tackle that. So what's your plan?
Yep, that's a great question. I appreciate it. And I think Ryan has some of the slides if you want to see the actual buckets of money again on how we're going to pay for these. Pardon me. Certainly we have a legal and contractual obligation to complete the Gateway Project bridge. So that's going to be one of our primary focuses in this next 2-year budget cycles to advance that along. Deedus and her team have already done a great job. I believe that particular project is about 95% designed. Is that correct, Deedus? Right. So once we get that wrapped up, then we're going to start making plans for the actual construction, which will include a lot of roadway that we're required to do as part of that as well. Certainly, we're on a very tight time frame to be able to get our new corporate yard built. As Frida, I can see the sweat rolling down her head normally when we talk about this because we have about 2 years before our lease is up on Riverside Avenue, and that property has been sold, my understanding is. So we have to be able to find a place for our fleet maintenance as well as the other functions. As part of that plan, we're going to be moving some of our water and wastewater folks out to that facility as well, which will allow us to utilize some of the enterprise funds to help us construct out there. And simultaneous to that, we will be collapsing administrative services out of the annex back into City Hall, likely backfilling those spaces that Public Works, wastewater, and water personnel would be vacating. So those are our top 2 priorities as far as actual construction. In that would also be finishing up Fire Station number 3, as well as the police substation on those. And then, of course, advancing as far as we can, being ready we're going to need funding help on the other projects. And so we want to make sure that as far as it depends upon us, we have everything as far as we can take it in order to be as eligible as we can for any type of assistance, either at the state or the federal level to build out those other projects. Most likely it'll just be shovel-ready status until we find funds.
So I have a really silly question. Is there any way we can work with these developers that are selling us their property to put these bridges on to let them build it and then pay them for the project?
Certainly, that's reimbursement agreements or some of the things that we're
like where we have Spur going like crazy out there right now, and their cost of building that bridge is a lot less money than what I'm seeing on this document. So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my question is, if there's any way possible to do it legally, it'd be really nice to do it because the reimbursement to them, I know we may not get some of the grants, but the overall cost of doing the project is so much less that.
Yeah, this might be a comment from our city attorney if she's listening right now, but typically on those types of projects, they're still prevailing wage projects because they're for the direct benefit of the city and required. So a lot of times saving money on those types of projects is not typical for us, similar to when we talk about building a parking structure. That's why those costs are so expensive for cities. Even if we know that it's going to be a project that the city is going to benefit from and at our behest, then we're going to end up paying prevailing wage on those. So our plan is to maximize as best we can any type of federal or state grants. Our team went to Sacramento about 3 weeks ago to meet with our legislators and our lobbyists and gave our best pitch. I think the council has seen our Golden Spike pamphlet that talks about those bridge needs that Warren and his team and others contributed to get both these projects. We consider them one project, one phase 1A and B on those to be able to obtain the funding that we need for those. Warren mentioned the opportunities for grants if we take advantage of things such as the parks and trails. We're looking at everything we can to possibly maximize those opportunities to fund them. But I think it's going to take a little bit of fortune and a lot of preparation and a lot of talking to get us there.
Thank you.
Brad, did you have anything? Yeah, along the same line, I think part of the problem is there's two sets of criteria as far as priorities. Our local priority and the Gateway project is very important. But if you look at it logically, Ware Bridge and 46 Overcrossing are one project. I know they're being handled in many ways as separate funding projects, but they're actually one project because the one doesn't work without the other. Not completely, not to solve the problem. And that's what the state and federal government are recognizing. So as long as we keep those wedded in our presentations to them, bulk of that money comes from them, not that we have to raise. Whereas, unfortunately, Gateway, we kind of painted ourselves into a corner a couple of decades ago on that one. And that's what makes that one so difficult. But that does give it a high priorities for us.
Councilman Hammond.
Yeah, I started thinking about too, Ty, we've been talking all the bridges and overpasses, two bridges, one overpass. Actually, there's two overpass with the train track, 24. It's been completely off my radar. I know you guys have been working on it. But that's another, and it seems like you had quite a lot of it in grant funding too. Looks like it's pretty well taken care of that way. So hopefully you're going to.
Our team is doing an excellent job, and we're again trying to maximize all of those opportunities. We've talking with some of our regional partners here in the county that use grant writers and have seen just outstanding results. I think the city of San Luis Obispo told me they spent about $100,000 in outside grant firm, and they received about $30 million in grants based upon that investment. So we're looking at all of these opportunities to be able to, we view these as regional bridges, with the exception of Gateway. I think that everything else is considered regional. They're going to bring over 2,500 jobs to the area, as well as the economic benefit that we're seeing from the development out there or projecting. So there's lots of opportunity, but you're right when it comes to talking with the developers as part of the developer agreement negotiations is to see what opportunities we have to have them partner with us in building those. But we're not quite to that stage yet with those particular bridges.
And then the other thing I was going to say, I think I heard tonight that next week, we're going to see something coming back on the corporate yard. Do we have a plan that we can see, kind of your vision, your layout on this yet? Or
Frida, do you want to?
What you're going to be seeing at the next council meeting is actually approving a contract to develop the design for the courtyard.
Is there a vision, though, that what you want to put out there yet? Or?
Nothing specific. I mean, we know it's going to be on the same property behind Fire Station 3 and will be housing fleet maintenance, facilities maintenance, all the landscape maintenance tasks, as well as some utilities. We're considering just best flow, being able, most importantly, to accommodate the training grounds that are still planned for that property.
For
So
fire, that's what I was going to ask, fire training, and also, are we going to have a PD shooting or anything? Or I think we crossed that one off, didn't we?
Yeah, for right now, the shooting range has been placed on hold, but I believe we have about 10 acres out there to build upon. So there's still room for future development should we need it. But right now, I think that the synergy between fleet maintenance and having fire trucks there is going to be a great improvement when we talk about operationally aligning and efficiency. That's going to be some great opportunity there through this. But most importantly, we just don't want to get caught in a challenging position because we don't have anywhere to move to once our lease is. And as council knows, this has been an impending challenge for us for a few years now, and we're finally to the point where this is the decision we have to make because some of our other alternatives just haven't panned out.
We need to hustle up on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get any further into council discussion, I'm going to ask the community if there's any public input. Is there anybody in the room that would like to speak? Is there anybody online who would like to speak?
Yes, sir. Jan Albin.
Welcome, Jan.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for this presentation. I'm a little bit thrown because you have not gone into the presentation for the Paso Robles adopted goals, but I did. And so having looked at the budget, I looked at the police department budget, and then I scrolled down through the goals, and starting on about page 12, I believe it is where the goals start. But then scrolling down to page 17, what I noticed was I'm sorry, I'm scrolling as we speak. Okay, so on attachment 1 under governance, you have enhance and amplify strategic communication efforts. And so looking at those, I saw under improve internal stakeholder communications, I see develop crisis communication plan. But under external, which is the public communications, that same item is not there. So I want to go to, tragically, the events of last week in Texas and tell you that I'm going to go back and ask you again to implement a public information officer position and to make sure that we put something in place where we can notify the citizens of this community that we have an emergency. And I think, again, based on just last week, but certainly in the world that we have today, that's a vital position to fill. So I'm asking you tonight, I'm asking the city manager or the police chief or whoever it is, are we moving forward on this, and are you going to implement that emergency alert system on the city website? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else waiting online to speak?
No, sir.
We'll close public comment, bring it back to the council. Chief, would you like to speak to emergency notification of the public?
Good evening, Mayor Martin, members of the council, Jonathan Stornetta, Fire Chief. I actually have a presentation already scheduled for the next city council meeting in regards to all forms of emergency alert systems that we currently have available here in the city. And I believe there's about 8 different formats that we currently utilize right now.
Very good.
Chief, maybe you could also mention some of our SIMS and NIMS training, as well as the ability to pull in folks from outside the county in the event that we have, a need for additional PIOs beyond what the city can handle.
Sure, there's a number of different options that Mr. Lewis brings up, and one is our training that's required under FEMA and the SIMS and NIMS ICS training, as well as all employees of the city are disaster service workers, so we're able to tap into other communities and cities throughout the state to come in and assist us, and especially when we're looking at specialty positions like the PIO, we have those available through the other cities, as well as our county incident management team has a number of PIOs that we can rely on. But we do have certified PIOs for incident management teams as staff at the fire department, and then also the police department has some PIOs as well.
Thank you. So possibly in the future, public notification in the event of emergency would be a good topic for a Paso Talks presentation for the community to educate people to the systems that do exist. That would be great.
I'd be happy to partner with you on that.
Thank you. Okay, we're back with the council. I'm going to reserve my comments until last and go to Mr. Strong.
Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing. And that is, we're talking about a lot about priorities, especially when we got into like the Vine Street and also the Gateway and also the 46 East. One thing we have to remember is that this county and state have things going on there too that affect these. One of them is the Caltrans and SLOCOG also are involved in trying to improve that off-ramp northbound from 101 onto 46 East. That gets clogged tremendously and actually backs up traffic right onto the highway. Just on Memorial Day alone, the backup was all the way to First Street on 101, bumper to bumper, waiting to get off on Highway 46 East. So that was 2.5 miles of traffic standing still, taking up one whole lane of 101. And they're really working diligently to try to figure out how to fix that. Mill Road is another one we have to be very careful how we look at that and prioritize, because some of that proposal involves taking away some vineyard area for one of our big wineries, and they're not very happy about that, and I'm not sure they're going to cooperate that much. So we better take a good look at some of these things as we're prioritizing things. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
Prioritization is not just internal, it's also external.
So I just want to repeat what I heard from Chief Sternetta, so that we have a couple people on the police department and on the fire department who are trained PIOs, including we have our own Shauna Hallenstein, right? So that's 5 people in city staff that could step in. I just want to make sure I repeat that. My other question, Ty, would be for the Vine Street Bridge. That amount of money we can bond for just on the TOT income from that property. Is that correct?
I believe Mr. Cornell came up with 50% of the projected revenue that the city would receive would be available to help pay the debt service. About $8 million is what we're projecting.
Correct. So yeah, 50% of the revenue generated from that development would go towards debt service for the first 30 years, and then the other 50% would go to general fund revenues.
Thank you.
Any other comments, Maria? So Councilman Gregory hit on one of my ongoing holy points, and that is prioritization. And we have such a wide array of projects we've talked about tonight, and such a wide array of services we've talked about. It's sometimes difficult to sift those out into what do we want to focus on first. And the way it kind of sifts out for me is this. I think as we go forward in general terms, what staff should be considering as our priority, and you can certainly disagree with me if you want, is first of all, we have legal and contractual issues. If we are legally contracted to do something, then we need to do that. You know, the longer we put that off, the greater the liability for the citizens and for our general fund. So I think that needs to be our number one priority as we go forward. Second, our public safety and city services projects. These are things that directly serve our citizens. These are things that are basic city services that we are in business to provide, particularly in the area of public safety. We've had numerous surveys from the community saying public safety is our number one concern. We want to make sure that those issues are taken care of. Third needs to be the area of economic development, and that is the development of new jobs, the development of a diversified economy for our city, and basically planning for future revenue streams rather than trying to decide what we're going to spend from current revenue streams. And in thinking about all of those priorities, we need to keep in mind every potential opportunity for regional alliances. That's the magic word nowadays. May not be tomorrow, but today that's the magic phrase, is regional alliance. The more people you can have together on the same page vying for the same thing, the more likely you're going to get support to get that done. Also, I think in the area of grant writing, I think we've heard tonight we're going to have new focus on that. I think that's really important since we rely so much on projected grants in paying for some of these improvements in the future. We have to be not penny wise and pound foolish when it comes to employing people that know how to write grants, know who to talk to about grants, and have a success record of completing those grants. And last but not least, and we've all seen the coffee cup, we need to be planning for shovel-ready projects. even if we don't have the money right now to do some of these projects, we have to have the plans to do them on the table, because how many times in the past have we missed out on funding because we didn't have a shovel-ready plan? And so everything that we can do, even if we can't build the actual project right now, if we can make those projects shovel-ready, it makes it more likely they'll be funded in the future. So that would be my thought about prioritization and mechanisms to use to get to those priorities. Mr. Gregory.
I'd just like to add one little detail. I'd like to say thank you to the wonderful job our staff has done getting grants over the last several years, including Deedus and everybody else in the room. It's really important that we respect everything they've done, but now to take it to the next level, to go after the state funding because of the alignment of political and financial needs. So that's all I have to say. One of the things, we need to have some flexibility in the budget. I'm sorry, we're looking at so much money. I will say that I'm, and this is not unusual for me, but I think that the staffing levels are very, very, very good. You guys have done a great job of anticipating our future and utilizing the funds from J20. And that's one of those things for the future is we have to figure out how to replace that funding. But I think from department to department, everybody's that's come before us tonight and showed us on the budget, it's very responsibly done and very, very acute, in my opinion. I appreciate the effort that's been done on that. I just want everybody to understand that we may be going into some difficult times. In the last 2 weeks, our inventory in real estate has gone up 900%, which means people have stopped buying homes. And if our economy continues to be on a 9% inflation rate and our cost of purchasing homes drives this up, we're looking at a recession. The good part of that, if there is a good part of that, is we get all the supplies we need because everything else stops. And we'll start seeing lumber and things like that, prices go down. But I want to caution everybody on the council and on the staff is that we have an unknown future ahead of us financially. It's scary, but there's enough positive in our country, I hope, to keep this together. But I think we really need to rely on our to be able to act quickly and save our ability to preserve our staff and our services. So thank you.
Councilman Hammond.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to just make a comment that, it's sound wisdom, I think, to try and get shovel ready on a lot of different projects. The only thing I caution too there is, these types of readiness are time sensitive and they can stay sour after a while. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of money if there's no chance of getting some help. But on the other hand, got to spend money sometimes to get it. And I think the idea of like San Luis City, hiring a grant writer to get that proportion, definitely sound wisdom on that. We need to do that for sure. The other thing I was going to mention, Ryan, too, on all these projects that we have, it's the old thing about you see boards with thermometers, how much it's going to cost, the red. It'd be nice to be able to show what it's going to cost us and then also what the grant funding is there, too, because it's a quick visual to the public that, we're getting some help, so to speak, on projects. And it'd be another way, too, that we're prioritizing. There might be something we might be able to spend a little more money for. If the grant money is higher, it kind of gives a priority, a visual anyway, of what we can do. So, I don't know, this just something to throw it out, visual. Thank you.
Other comments, Mr. Strong?
Well, final comment, the staff has done a wonderful job, and they are to be congratulated. I want to remind us, everybody, though, that when we go after those grants, what we're going after is basically our own money. This is money our people have paid into taxes at the state and federal level. And it's time it came back and got done for the people who paid for it. So a lot of that money is our money. Now, sometimes we get lucky, we get more than our share. But usually it's the other way around. So there's nothing to be ashamed of in getting a lot of grants. Even if somebody else didn't get as many, because we earned them, and we've earned them for decades. And thank you for all of your efforts in securing that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Garcia?
Yes, sir. I would just like to also make a comment for the staff. I know that the past years, the staff has worn multiple hats to try to keep this city going forward. And so showing our support, showing you that we're here to also give you the help, that just means a lot to me, that we're gonna vote on making sure that you have the right staff to move forward. Sometimes we talk about being able to retain people. It's important that we give enough help in order to retain. We don't want you to get stressed out or start looking at other communities when we want to keep you here. So I'm glad that that's going to be our priority, is to increase staff and give you more help. So thank you for all the hard work that you do for our community. Thank you.
I will echo all those comments. We do appreciate staff's work, and tonight's example is just the tip of the iceberg and one example of the type of work they've been doing for many years. We appreciate that. So the action before us is to receive and file a report providing any desired direction. I would entertain a motion.
Receive and file.
Yeah, I move that we receive and file with the comments from the City Council. I think we're pretty well aligned. What Steve had to say was pretty good.
Second. Motion by Councilman Gregory, second by Councilman Strong. There's no further discussion. Mr. Gregory?
Yes, I want to remind everybody on the council of one thing. This budget we're looking at, the money in surplus funding we would spend is probably larger than most surpluses we've had in the last 20 years. So it's a big deal, but I think it's necessary. So.
Right. We have an opportunity here that we have not had in the past. If there's no further discussion, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Gregory?
Aye.
Councilmember Strong?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia?
Aye.
Councilmember Hammond?
Aye.
Mayor Martin?
Aye. Motion passes 5-0. Any further business, Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, I just want to take the opportunity, Mr. Mayor and council members, to point out, I think each of you got one of these pamphlets in your mailbox. This is another collaborative effort by city staff, everybody from our folks in the library and rec side through every department that had a hand in putting this together. I'm pretty proud of it because I think it's one of the first of its kind for this city. Although the council has put together several goals in the past, they've been pretty high overarching goals that a lot of initiatives could have fallen under, but staff took the time with council's assistance to go through, identify those goals, and then put together work plans for these. So over the next couple of years, this is going to be one of the guiding tools that we use to remind us of where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish. This item, if it's not already online, will be online for the public to be able to see at prcity.com. Otherwise, you can come down to City Hall and grab your own copy of it. It's about a 5-page brochure that goes through every one of the goals council adopted during this budget process and the work plan to get them accomplished.
Thank you. Any closing comments, Councilwoman Garcia?
No, sir.
Mr. Strong? Mr. Hammond? Good to go. Mr. Gregory? Very good. Coming up next, we have Development Review Committee meeting Monday, June 6th, 3:30 p.m. City Council regular meeting Tuesday, June the 7th at 6:30 p.m. If there's no further business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Motion by Councilman Hammond, second by Councilman Gregory. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all for your hard work.
We do have a closed session next week.
Melissa?